Welcome, I'm Hernan Murdoch. In this episode, we're going to talk about planning deliverables. To help us better understand what product we generate during this planning process and the deliverables that are going to be provided to others within the department and outside, we have with us Kathleen Crawford, who will help us better understand these products. So, welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Hernan. Good to be here.
Nice to have you here. We have some questions for you. We need some help. We need some help. So, during the planning process, it's not all about us, right? It's not only about us accumulating documents and information. There are some deliverables as well. So, help us better understand what are some of the main ones, really. What kind of products do we generate during this planning process? What kind of deliverables are there?
Well, I'm going to talk about several, and let's start with the client engagement letter. As we wrap up our planning and we're getting ready to cross the threshold into field work, it's important that we share with our clientele what is happening, what are we doing in their area, in their process, or in their system. What are we there for? So typical contents of such a letter or such a memo will be just an acknowledgement that the area was scheduled for an audit, maybe something about the context of that it's risk-based or something of that nature. Also, we will talk about meetings, the cadence of meetings, including some kind of opening meeting, which is usually a mark of the crossing over the threshold between planning and field work. There'll be some kind of kickoff meeting. They'll also identify an auditor in charge. So the phrasing here sounds a little bit funny, but it's intended to communicate that a particular point person. So an auditor in charge will be one of the point people who will be identified in the engagement memo or engagement letter so that the client knows who to reach out to with any questions and some general responsibilities that that person or those people have, who they are, what they do, what their key responsibilities are.
Okay.
In addition, there'll be acknowledgement of an audit team. The team members may or may not be identified in this document, but some organizations choose to list everyone who's going to be on the project. So you can see a lot of different practices there.
Okay.
There are, so what happens at the beginning, who the people are, what happens at the end in terms of some kind of closing conference, and how the draft audit report will be delivered and then discussed.
Okay, so in terms of the process, then this looks like not only a document to make the client aware of who are members of the team and the cycle, the duration of the engagement, but also it lets them know that there'll be a mechanism built in for them to also reply to it,
Mm-hmm.
so that this is not a one-sided exercise, but you will have an opportunity also to respond to the observations we raise, and that'll be part of this as well. So it's an educational tool as well as a planning tool.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. So if the organization is slow in responding. So does this document provide some like a heads up to the client in terms of how much time should go by from the time the draft report is produced until the final gets produced? How does that process work, just to clarify those expectations?
Sure. Well, one of the ways I like to think about this particular deliverable is that it should read like a service level agreement. So we
Mm,
will often have service level agreements with vendors in organizations. This is what we give over to you. This is what we get back. So that's the way that I like this document to be constructed, so that
yes.
we talk about the commitments that we're making. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. But in order for us to be able to do or to meet some of those commitments, we need to have that give and take from you. So you'll
Mhm.
notice at the bottom of the graphic, it makes one specific reference to numbers of days to respond to an audit draft report. The final report will be distributed to, and then a number of folks will be listed. These are just two small pieces of what that concept that I'm trying to get across, the service level agreement and what the expectations on both sides should be in terms of communication and commitment to providing information on a timely basis, so that we will rather be as efficient and effective as possible and minimize the disruption to the business. So we really want to get across, if you do these things, we will be able to be done faster and we will be out of your hair and you can go back to business as usual.
That's
That's
very
a
good.
sweeten the deal. I mean, it's something that we're going to have to do anyway, but it will be much better if we can have that give and take.
Excellent. Yes, because definitely you want to clarify those expectations and you will have metrics within internal audit as well. So
Sure.
someone is tracking the duration of the whole audit. They're also tracking from the time that the field work ended until the draft report goes out, from the draft report to the final report. So all of these are also benchmarked. So it's helpful to clarify that with the client so they can help us meet our own metrics. So this is a document that goes outside the department. Do we put together something that's also for internal consumption, something to help us all understand within the department who is working on this engagement? Is
Exactly.
there such a thing?
Exactly. So there's also a similar type of document for us. So not only do we send something out to the client, but there's also something similar for us to ponder and for us to reflect on. So let's take a look at that graphic. This deliverable is called the planning memo. It's for auditor's use, and it's going to be part of our working papers. So those working papers are documenting everything about what we do, what we find, and what we conclude. So at the end of the planning phase, there should be some significant information that can be put into the working papers, especially in those cases where the entire team hasn't been present for the planning phase. We want to be able to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So there'll be background information, there'll be other kinds of critical information, key personnel in the area that we're going to be in touch with, the audit program that has been developed, so our plan of attack, if you will, on the area, process, or system that we're evaluating. We'll also be identifying the audit staff people who will be part of this, because sometimes audit projects will have a skeleton crew for parts of the work and then maybe a more robust crew for other parts of the work. And this can be quite important in order for us to be as efficient and effective as possible. One of the banks that I worked for had a twice yearly exercise of a vault count on Wall Street in New York that happened on 3-day weekends twice a year that involved the entire audit division, and that was 60 plus people. So the planning memo in something like that, you can probably appreciate, had to be extremely detailed, because as soon as the bell rang at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, we had to be in there and starting the work so that we could be done by the time that Sunday evening rolled around, and they'd get back, that function would get back to business on Monday morning when the bell rang again. So the planning memo makes a big difference in a lot of situations, and the more detail that we can put in it, the better it will benefit the stakeholders who need to consume it, who are our colleagues.
That's great. Yes, clarifying expectations always good, and having a plan so everybody is working in a coordinated manner to get the work done fast. So that's great. As far as work papers and so on, what kind of other considerations are there as relates to this?
Well, we will a little bit later on be talking about some of the IIA standards that relate to work papers and the attributes or the qualities of evidence. But for now, let's just acknowledge that this is a very important deliverable. We create a work product that tells the story of the audit. So I've used this phrase before: begin with the end in mind. We have to document our work. Period. End of story. But how we do that can be excellent, or it can be just a passing grade or barely a passing grade. So we want to make sure that this product, this collection of documentation, is going to tell the story of the audit. It should tell what the auditors did, what the auditors found, and what the auditors concluded. It's a repository of all sorts of information, but thinking of it as that trail of breadcrumbs can be a good rule of thumb, especially for less experienced audit professionals. If they get in the habit of showing what they did, what they found, and what they concluded, it's very difficult to go wrong. We need to learn the requirements or preferences of our team. So under different leadership, there might be slightly different preferences of how information is portrayed. Make sure to ask the question and adapt to the leadership that you're working with. Think deeply about the processes, systems, and functions that you've reviewed, and be very, very systematic and very disciplined in showing proof of work. This is not something that you can do at the end of field work and know that you won't have a well-documented process, and you'll forget things. So do it as you go. That would be my advice on this.
Very good advice. Absolutely. Yes, there are so many things that happen, and we want to make sure we capture them when they happen so we don't forget, we don't leave anything out, and we do it in a way that's going to be meeting our quality expectations as well. I like what you mentioned in terms of clarifying expectations as well. So how much detail are we expecting, and how do we want it worded? What kind of structure or format, what templates are we going to use? If we clarify those things during the planning phase, everything else will be a lot easier later on. So as we're talking about what happens later on, how about progress? Do we also have anything that relates to planning that we need to establish and clarify and document at this point in anticipation of what we do during fieldwork?
I believe so. I think it serves everyone to be able to state the expectations as we're crossing into field work. And so the deliverables here that would be upcoming would be regular updates on progress and issues. So this is going to be another sort of outward facing deliverable, but there are two different audiences. They're going to, in some ways, their needs or their expectations are going to intersect or overlap. In other cases, as you'll see at the bottom half of the slide, there's a slightly different flavor. So regular updates to both client management and audit management on the work completed. So what are we done with? What's in progress? What's still to be done? The cadence in terms of frequency, I think, depends on the complexity of the audit and how long the fieldwork period is expected to last. But this is something that we should negotiate and manage people's expectations in terms of how it's going to be done and when it's going to be done. For client management, we need to discuss issues likely to be in the report. I think most auditors who are experienced will recognize that this is something that not everything that we discuss is going to end up in the audit report, but it's important to be, I think it's important to be broad in bringing these things to light and then narrow them down as opposed to going in the opposite direction. There should be, in fact, I know this is a favorite phrase of yours, Hernan, no surprises. Exactly. Zero, no surprises. So err on the side of maybe what looks like too much, and you can dial it back, and that's far less painful than thinking, oh, this isn't going to matter, and then finding later on that it does matter quite a lot and could disrupt everything that we've built in terms of trust and collaboration with our clientele.
Right. How about communications within the department and so on? I would imagine there needs to be an escalation mechanism so that the managers of the auditors on that team are also aware of what's happening, because they may be managing multiple projects, right?
For sure. So we also want to make sure that the updates to audit management are regular. Results, similar to the point about discussing issues likely to be in the report with the client, we also want to make sure that we discuss results, especially those things that are likely to be reportable. We are definitely going to communicate also about team performance and growth. If folks were tuned into a previous episode, we talked about setting those expectations and making sure that our individual team members have the opportunity to try new things and grow with sufficient supervision. And so we want to make sure that that happens. And this is one way that we will keep our audit management aware of whether or not proficiency is growing, whether new tactics or new tools have been tried and things of that sort. And finally, for our audit management, we definitely want to pass on any and all feedback from the client. So the auditor in charge, that point person that I mentioned on a previous graphic, that person absolutely has to be the fulcrum of all this information so that it makes what needs to go to the client goes to the client, what needs to go to our audit management goes to our audit management, so that everybody's on the same page and knows exactly where we are at any given point in time.
This is very much the centerpiece here is making sure there's abundant communication and that everybody knows what's happening. So first of all, what your expectations are and how we're going to execute. And as we advance, that we keep everyone up to date, and that aspect of it in terms of what we did, what we're doing, what's coming up. I think that helps us a lot. It kind of simplifies it a little bit conceptually, but in practice, we need to make sure we fill in all the blanks. But what we did, what are we doing, what is coming up? That's a very good way to remember it as well. So as we are looking at this base of the engagement, then I'm very happy that you were able to clarify for us some of these things that happen. So we know that we have an engagement letter that goes out to the client. We have a planning memo that stays within the department and helps the members understand what they need to do. And if there are new additions to the team, they can be onboarded very quickly. We have those work papers that are going to be pervasive throughout the whole engagement. And then those updates so everybody knows where we are at every point in time. So thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
It's my pleasure.
If you like this series, subscribe to the ACI Learning YouTube channel to enjoy more audit-related content.